There's something so nice about coming home on a nice summer day. School ending, work being over, the weekend starting, and just sitting back, enjoying a nice sesh of gaming. Some games you play solo. Other games you play with some friends. Some games are PvP, some games are co-op, some games are a mix of both. We are here, by everyone's surprise, to talk about some Destiny today. You see, before the days of doing Destiny chores, there was a lot of game to play, weapons to earn, bosses to smash into the ground. Summertime, a time where the vitamin D was hitting nicely. We didn't have the world inside at all times except for the Chad gamers. But we weren't forced to be inside. The gamers just chose. And you could take a trip to the zoo if you wanted. The zoo is another name for the focus of today's video. But unlike our zoos filled with zebras, lions, and, well, rest in peace, my friend, this one is filled with some nasty looking aliens. For this zoo, we need to fly to the giant bass-looking ship in space called the Leviathan and meet the Menagerie. The Menagerie was Destiny's first ever 6-player activity that was not a raid, nor was it PvP 6 stacking. Destiny 2 has had a few 6-player activities since this one debuted in summer of 2019, but to the majority of the Destiny player base, nothing has ever been able to top the Menagerie. So, I am here to tell its story. I am here to talk about this zoo of monsters, this cup full of loot, and ultimately, I am here to tell you the name of today's video and answer its question. Why was the Menagerie so awesome? Some footage in this video is from players around the community. Their links will be in the description of this video, as well as the music too. You should subscribe. Thank you. 1 week from now is the last call for the limited time Atrax 1 merchandise in color. We extended the window slightly for this drop, so make sure you don't miss your chance or it will be gone. Destiny had always stuck to a few core activities. You had your strikes, you had your crucible, and you had your raids. Well, with Forsaken, Bungie introduced Gambit and Gambit Prime to mix the folly of these two activities into one, and while I don't think it's my favorite mode, I commend the effort to the developer for trying something new here. That being said, Gambit only had 4 players that could participate. The activity for the new seasonal content model Bungie implemented also had 3 to 4 players depending on the activity max as well. So while it was easy to pivot from a strike into something like Forges, and while it was easy to pivot from Gambit Prime into Reckoning, raids really only had one place to move the team to for some cooldown time. And it wasn't against aliens, unless you count this dude. With all the raids leading into the season of Opulence, it meant that unless you were doing another raid, there was only PvP. 5 raids and no place to cool off for some lighter fun in between while still shooting aliens. Now, if only Callus decided to drop a zoo of aliens on Destiny players with a brand new raid. What do you want me to say? Of course, you click the video. With the release of Season of Opulence on June 4th of 2019, Bungie released the big guns all at once. This was the last piece of content the developer had made alongside the other studios, and while normally I would say Bungie did this, for this video I'm going to give equal credit, or maybe even more credit, to Vicarious Visions, a first-party company of Activision, for their work here. Just like the work this studio did for Warmind of Year 1, Opulence was the best season for Year 2, and it wasn't hard at all to see why. I may be personally biased to the Season of the Forge for introducing a raid, some amazing weapons, and of course Niobe Labs, but Opulence did more for the majority of the player base. So even though it's not my personal favorite, I understand why it's probably the best season that there's ever been. On day 1 alone, the Menagerie and a brand new raid were released for Opulence. We'll talk about the impact Day 1 had on the player base later, but for now, let's enjoy the beauty that was this new activity and this new season. Opulence brought with it a ship with another robot that was full of gold and chests. This robot was named Wiener 99. Wait, Werner 99. Nah, that doesn't have the same ring to it. Wiener 99! My man Wiener gave players the Chalice of Opulence, the key item to enjoy the topic of today's video. Wiener also had treasure maps, something that was a part of the dead dude's quest in year 1 of Destiny 2, and just like in those days, these chests were scattered around the universe and had the chance to drop exotics, when they used to be rare, and powerful loot, along with these cool little runes. Wiener also had chests on board the ship which dropped runes as well, but those were for a new currency called Imperials, something players also wanted to hold on to for a bit. Once the player base got their first rune and slotted that into the chalice, it was off to meet the Menagerie, with 5 other players matching in there too. The Menagerie began right where Vicarious Visions left off, in the Leviathan. But this time, not in the heights of Valkaor. No, this time in a much darker and more vintage portion of the Leviathan. The Menagerie always started with the lamplighting, a very Destiny area. Kill big scary bosses, dunk orbs, about your run-of-the-mill activity for the franchise. But unlike other activities, the Menagerie incentivized teams to be efficient with their time. While activities like Forges and Reckoning before it required teams to beat them for the rewards at the end, something that makes perfect sense to me, there was also no incentive to beat them fast. While Menagerie didn't have extra rewards for beating the activity fast, it did let players skip a lot of the potential activities simply by understanding the mechanics and working together. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's move past the lamplighting and on to one of many activities. Each week, a new rotation of small activities was in order, with modifiers to fit that week as well. These activities were small versions of things Destiny players have seen before, but mashed into one giant space. Think about the Menagerie like Mario Party, but just the minigames. Except you're all on the same team. It's a great balance that Destiny 2 struck, and I think it worked here perfectly, balancing very light raid mechanics while also incentivizing faster rewards for being speedy and utilizing great teamwork. The Menagerie really was like Mario Party as well, with how many mini games there were to take part in. While Forges were one activity, Reckoning was one activity, and well, any seasonal or DLC had one thing to do per activity. The Menagerie had 7, and that doesn't include the bosses. It's kind of crazy if you think about it. Vicarious Visions went above and beyond what even the Prison of Elders had in terms of content, and what most raids have, while also providing a raid that very same season. It's impossible to not give a lot of credit to this activity, just as it's impossible to not credit Vicarious and Bungie for taking the Destiny formula, figuring out what worked, and cranking that dial to 11. The first minigame activity we'll discuss is the Hunted. The Hunted is what you'd come to expect from Destiny mechanics. You guessed it, plates. Some plates were scattered around the room, 4 on each corner with hallways connecting, while one lonesome plate sat in the middle. The goal was to capture these plates for points that filled the meter, while killing these giant knights gave you even more points to work with. The best way a team could tackle this was to split the group into 3s and capture 2 at a time without getting too overrun by ads. So slap on that insanely powerful Phoenix protocol with Mountaintop and Recluse never having to be reloaded, and you were good. I feel like this encounter would have been extra special if the infinite reload and these abilities weren't as strong. But it was still a pretty good one all around, and probably the best of the plate-like mechanic activities in a while. Next up, we have the Gauntlet. My personal favorite of the Menagerie, but one that came with a pretty laughably bad bug. The Gauntlet had players kill a boss, then go through a better version of Callus's Gauntlet from the Leviathan raid. Plenty of platforming, places to die, and always that one teammate hugging the back ready to get run by the fire. Once across the finish line, it was another fight against another boss, getting progressively stronger each time, and the Gauntlet race getting progressively harder to platform through after each boss. It was an encounter that built on itself and rewarded teams that were efficient. Well, I say that half-assed because of a bug that lasted for literal months and made this encounter my favorite for time's sake more than fun's sake as the Menagerie went on. Oh, did I say bug? I meant plural, 2 bugs. One was just less offensive than the other. The first bug, and the less offensive bug, was as simple as running through one of the checkpoint rings, then jumping back through that ring, then out the front again. I have no clue how this one lasted, but it's less offensive than the main bug, which let anyone who just shot a grenade launcher as they died or crossed the finish line to literally end the whole entire encounter there. No, I'm not joking. You could skip the rest of the encounter by shooting a grenade launcher across the finish line.
You can use Prospector or suicide yourself to get the flawless, going the distance, and the Chariots of Fire triumphs. By shooting Prospector over the finish line, it counts as a Guardian passing through. Or if you die right after crossing, it has the same effect. After spamming Prospector shots, you still need to cross the finish line for the flawless triumph. Also, you can use Sword Block or a Super to survive the flames in the running portion. I believe Telesto and other grenade launchers count, however they fire slower.
This one took months to patch, and I know this is more of a rhetorical question at this point, but was this even play tested? It doesn't hurt the experience necessarily, and you could argue for the grind it made the experience better, but it's just something I can't understand slipping through for that long. Moving on from the gauntlet and on to the crystals. Another one of my favorite encounters. The crystals had players utilizing the Argos mechanics of picking up laser beams and shooting crystals with boss fights thrown in after every crystal was broken in the room. I like this encounter for a couple reasons. It was vertical, so making sure your team's spacing was on point was a huge bonus. The bosses were actually annoying, with the Cyclops being the hardest of all of them to deal with, and utilizing Leviathan mods meant that things like Striking Hand made breaking the crystals just a bit faster for players who put in thoughts to their builds. This was also one of the only encounters I felt like the max score was kind of difficult to obtain, even for organized teams. It was always a close finish on the final boss and made for some clutch hero moments to shine. Really well put together and something you don't see often in Destiny: verticality. Now, just to juxtapose the last two being my favorite encounters, the next two are probably my least favorite. Starting with the Arcborn. The Arcborn was just run around in green pools and dunk, well, I don't know what we're dunking, green. Once all of these areas had been maxed out, fighting an ogre, then 2 ogres, then 2 ogres and a wizard. I felt like the creativity really died for this encounter and put almost no stress on the players to work together. I say almost no stress, as the only piece of stress were these damn traps. Seriously, whoever put these in here, I just want to know who hurt you. I really did not like this encounter among what I consider to be an awesome activity. But unfortunately for us, there's one that I think is actually worse. Meet the Mockery. What is supposed to be Callus having some lighthearted dad jokes about the blind well somehow makes for an even blinder version of the Dreaming City's public event area. The Mockery pits the player in the same spot as the Arcborn, and the opening to the Crown of Sorrow raid. Maybe that's why I don't. The Mockery had players stand in these tiny bubbles of aura and ask the player to kill wizards in order to drop balls, then dunk into the shielded areas to keep the shield staying up the whole time. The best way to handle this was to split up into 3 groups of 2 and dunk the balls to your safe haven each time you kill a wizard. But the room was a hazy green the whole time. You had a limited window to do damage. Wizards inflicted a slowing and damaging effect on the player already, and they move around, so it's hard to tell who gets which wizard to dunk the ball to which side. Also, when it was boss time, the effect never went away, so you had to play the same way you did before, unlike Blind Well. But just like Blind Well, there's ogres instead of these annoying wizards. I really disliked this encounter because it forced you to play slow when there's a timer and an incentivized progression meter to encourage you to move faster. It just felt a little hypocritical to what Vicarious and Bungie were aiming to do here. That being said, we have only one kind of bad encounter and one what I would call a bad encounter out of 7 total encounters. And I commend Vicarious for at least trying to think outside the box with this one, even if I didn't personally like it. For the final main chunk of the Menagerie's activities, we have the Riposte. Another one I would consider very well done. This has players killing knights with swords and getting the sword relic to drop and use it in order to take the shields off of other knights and ogres. This encounter gets progressively more chaotic as time goes on too, and is a great deviation from some of the other encounters in the Menagerie. While some encounters encourage you to split up as a group, the Riposte very much encourages the team to run laps and kill enemies together. The ads even spawn together to cement this strategy further. This encounter was also downright chaotic in the little tiny room with thrall everywhere, knights everywhere, shields needing to be broken, ogres spawning in, and even a shrieker in the middle of the room. You see, this is another reason I would say the Menagerie was downright awesome. Every time there was a splitting up encounter like the Hunted or the Crystals, it was usually followed by an encounter like the Riposte or the Gauntlet, which encouraged teams to play together. Just like the encounters themselves, just as memorable was... Just like I can give so much credit to Vicarious Visions on the activities in the Menagerie, I can give just the same credit to the boss fights. Other than the time gating of certain fights, mitigating them on a rotation per week, each boss was well worth the wait time. The first up was a Minotaur named Hasapico, and the fight was filled with what the rest of the Menagerie was filled with, light raid mechanics. Hasapico was not able to be damaged at first, but by killing a harpy and standing in that harpy's goop, I don't know, players were able to push this boss over. Now, we mentioned before how auto-loading made encounters easier, and that is definitely the case for Hasapico, as one phasing with Mountaintop and Anarchy or Attractor Cannons for the debuff at the time with Swarm of the Raven made this boss really just a pushover. Let me explain how strong the player base was offensively. The player base was able to stack Striking Hand for a 20% buff, Emperor's Blaze mod for a 25% buff, while standing in the well for another percent on top of that, and power melees for an extra 5%, Tractor Cannon being a 50% debuff if the player was using void weapons, and boss spec mods for another 7%, plus some more that I probably forgot. And you have an absolutely wild player base. Look, I know that sounds like a mouthful, and hearing that I probably put some of you to sleep, but that really wasn't that hard to pull off. It's just running a couple mods, standing in a pool, shooting a gun one time at an enemy, then doing your normal damage. That accumulated to around 132% extra damage in buffs and debuffs, and now I think you see my point about how this boss became a pushover. I really liked the hole-in-the-wall mechanics Hasapico brought to the Menagerie, and I also like how Bungie expanded upon those mechanics with Coria in the most recent season of the game. But I can only imagine how much more fun the Menagerie would have been in its prime if you could only use some of these buffs and not all of them stacked. Hell, what would it have been like if you couldn't just shoot forever without the fear of reloading? I do love this boss fight though, and I'm willing to look past the game's meta flaws at that time to appreciate how great Hasapico and the rest of the Menagerie really were. After defeating Hasapico was where I think a lot of you still chugging along this video were also very much here for. Yeah baby, the loot! But just like Bungie, I'm gonna time gate that until we finish talking about the rest of the bosses. But here's some Dreaming City weapons for your troubles. Next boss up was Arunak, a hive ogre that required you to throw bombs at it to break the shield, then just roast away. Getting these bombs was from cursed thralls, but there was always a bug that made it so a ton of bombs spawned from one thrall for reasons that I don't have a job to understand. Once the shield was broken, this boss got tossed even faster than Hasapico, and with how tiny the room was, with the sloped sides being the only real cover, this boss's difficulty really wasn't the boss itself, but the environment to fight it in. Almost akin to stuffing a cabinet full of cups, then being surprised that the cup smacked you when you open the cabinet later. This boss in Hasapico became significantly more difficult on hard mode, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, this boss was very much a product of its arena and makes me want a boss rush mode in Destiny. Is a boss rush mode something that you guys would like to see? Let me know in the comments. The final boss was Pagori, a giant Hydra with Cyclops at the back of the same room where the Arcborn and the Mockery took place. I want to say that I lied earlier when discussing the bosses all being great, because Pagori was just kind of okay at best. Like the Mockery and the Arcborn, and like the opening to the Crown of Sorrows raid, I really found this boss to be my least favorite. Maybe it's just the map design here at this point, or maybe I'm just an asshole. I don't know, but I really can't say that I love this boss the same way I did the others. Before you make your decision on the boss, let's talk about the rune's mechanics. Capturing 3 plates and defending them from Minotaurs and Cyclopses at the back of the room. After the 3rd plate is captured, the boss teleports to that side and sends baby harpies to fly at you while you get an opportunity to just roast the boss. On normal mode, this guy goes down pretty quickly as long as you have teams work together. It's not a crazy elaborate fight, but it fits with the theme of plate mechanics in Destiny, so it's also inoffensive. But for the final boss and the 3-week wait to get to this final boss, I think a lot of Destiny players were hoping for something more on the side of Hasapico and less on the side of basic. So those are the normal mode boss fights for the Menagerie, and now that you've waited for what has felt like 3 weeks itself, let's talk about how the loot was for the player base at that time. This loot system and loot progression was so good, I might go out on a limb and say it was too good. But there's also a catch to it that hurt the Menagerie unintentionally. So, those runes we mentioned earlier and those Imperials we talked about had a purpose. The runes were to slot your chalice for a reward, so based on the color and name of the rune, a different reward would drop. The Imperials were gained by completing the Menagerie bounties, triumphs, and doing treasure hunts, and were used to upgrade the chalice and open the chests on Wiener's ship. This system works so well and fit perfectly for Destiny, giving the player a sense of mystery in each rune, and then as the upgrades to the chalice happened, the mixing and mashing of combinations for the chalice's runes became more inviting. Taking a green with a red with a blue. What was it going to be? Pride and joy? Wealth and excess? The list went on, and unlocking all 3 slots for the chalice was the ultimate goal. Once the runes were slotted and the boss was defeated though, it was as simple as walking up to the chest and collecting one of 28 weapons. 6 were brand new to the Menagerie, and the other 22 were weapons from throughout the year of content. Or you could collect 20 pieces of gear with one of those sets being brand new to the Menagerie. So with all of these combos, there were 48 total items to collect and grind rolls for. 11 of those items being brand new from normal mode, and we even have some specific loot to hard mode that I haven't mentioned yet. The loot was great here, and the system of acquiring it even better, especially for the players that wanted a centralized place to grind Destiny 2. But there was another part of obtaining the loot that made it so good, it ended up hurting the Menagerie and other activities that came later. But this one was completely unintentional, I think. After opening the chest at the end of the Menagerie, you might think that was it. I mean, you could slot runes in your chalice for later runs, but that had to be it, right? Well, if you ran around the open space of the Menagerie and hit another load zone, then ran back to the chest, you could open it up as many times as the ending timer allowed. This was a complete oversight, but one that I think most people agree was a welcomed one. I think only getting one reward from the chest after all that time of encounters and a boss wasn't really that worthwhile. However, getting anywhere from 5 to 7 rewards from running this glitch may have been a bit too much, even if it was a bug that let this happen. This bug would see a lot of time before it was patched, but more than anything, the community rallied behind this one, since getting the god roll of the new Austringer hand cannon and beloved sniper already took a long time. And that was on top of the fact that you could use the 3rd rune slot in the chalice to choose a masterwork for your weapon. The RNG was wide on these drops, and Austringer and Beloved, it's adored now, were both very powerful weapons. Not to say that the other brand new weapons weren't great, these were just the standouts for normal mode. On top of this bug being good for drops, it also made getting the brand new title Shadow a lot more friendly to the player base, since you needed 200 chests opened for one of the triumphs, making the title Shadow go from a massive time sink to something more obtainable for the player base. So that was basically normal mode for the Menagerie, the bosses, and the loot. But there was just something missing still. Something to solidify the Menagerie as Destiny 2's most iconic and downright awesome piece of content. Something that not even raids get to share the glory of anymore. Heroic mode Menagerie. Heroic or hard mode Menagerie was not messing around. Not only was the level recommended to be 740, enemies by the end of the Menagerie scaled up to 770 power. Heroic Menagerie was also not match made, upping the emphasized stakes that your team had to come prepared. Hasapico may have been a pushover on normal mode, but on hard mode you were going to have to deal with these waves of ads after the boss's DPS phase was over. Also, wipes meant your team was sent back to orbit. Failed filling the meter to even reach Hasapico, back to orbit. The fight structure became a lot more apparent and proved that Vicarious truly designed these boss fights for heroic mode instead of normal. I mean, no further proof is needed than being able to see the whole fight on heroic mode instead of a 20-second one phase on normal mode. A better example of a great fight for hard mode was Arunak. You remember that tiny room that players needed to squeeze into? Well, now it became a lot more deadly, knowing that the Thrall would kill you on explosions, the Acolyte grenades would kill you instantly, the boss's shot would kill you instantly, etc. Want to approach the boss with tractor cannon? Yeah, good luck. Serious threats came up in these fights, and getting the flawless triumph for the title became a much harder ordeal since players needed heroic mode flawless too. These challenges are actually some of my original Destiny content on the channel, making guides for doing these fights flawless.
We all just stayed calm. We all used rally banner shields. We all used wells of radiance, killed ads, and just did a simple 2-phase of damage.
Yeah, I cringe at my old videos with all of you too. Pagori is the only boss I really don't consider to be on par with the rest of them for hard mode mechanics, simply because the boss was never an issue. The Cyclops in the back and the Minotaurs were a much stronger threat, and the encounter didn't change no matter the difficulty. It wasn't as bad as I make it sound, but it definitely was the easiest and least impressive of the three. For your efforts in hard mode though, players received double the loot on the first run of the week per character.
Oh, I got the Izanagi catalyst. Fog.
Did you?
Yeah.
From nice.
Yeah, from the
Yeah.
Assuming everybody gets it then.
200. It's it. That's awesome.
I didn't get it, dude.
I got curated
Yeah,
gloves.
My shotguns came curated, yeah. Mess worked, I mean.
All right. What's the Twilight Oath thing?
Jubilation and whoever is the fastest RPM league.
It's just double purple.
Double purple, yeah.
So
There was a fully masterwork piece of whatever you slotted, and a chance of one of 3 class swords needed for the title. But those are extremely rare and would later have to be patched in to guarantee at least one. They were that rare. If you beat Heroic with a fully upgraded chalice from using those Imperials, players would also receive the Izanagi's Burden Catalyst, which gives the weapon 25% extra damage. And yes, before you ask in the comments, a video on Izanagi's Burden is coming one day. With all that said, That was heroic mode for the Menagerie, and you know, I gotta say, it was nothing but fantastic. I mean, the rest of the Menagerie was already great, but hard mode upping the stakes and reaching into some heights in terms of challenge was exactly what the game needed. Exactly what the activity needed, and it's something that the folks at Vicarious Visions and Bungie should pat themselves on the back for. Unfortunately, I also have to report that it didn't all end as well as it started. So let's get to those closing thoughts so we can end this already massive video. The Menagerie was a downright awesome activity, but some of you watching this video may wonder, well, where the hell is it? Also, why didn't it end all that well? What were you talking about with the whole day one fiasco? Let's just start with day one. I think my own personal thoughts on Menagerie were deterred since the raid race was the same day as the season's release. So for myself and many others racing, it meant 6 straight hours of grinding the game for just a chance to take on the raid, which definitely didn't give the Menagerie that relaxing feeling it was supposed to truly have. It's a personal problem for sure, but when this activity first came out, I definitely was more burnt out from day one raiding than I gave credit for at that time. And I think this day one fiasco is why Bungie has never made another day one raid the same day as the season since. Let's move from personal problems and on to a more community-wide issue at the conclusion of the season of the Opulence. You now know why the Menagerie's chest glitch spoiled the player base very hard. So, going back to getting 1 drop per run just wasn't satiating that same hunger players had when the glitch was around, and took what a lot of players found to be that extra layer of fun racing for how many drops they could get at the end away.
No matter how logically sound Bungie's argument may be, if you're used to seeing 5 cookies at the end of the tunnel, and now we're just seeing half a cookie, you get where I'm coming from, boys. Regardless, this is something that Bungie is not going to change. I was actually hoping that at the end of every Menagerie run, that we would see like maybe 2 or 3 chests. Or maybe if you completed the run flawlessly, maybe you would have extra chests. Either way it goes, it's a bummer for sure. It's a step back in my opinion.
Bungie did try to remedy this a bit by doing a community-wide escalation protocol Nightfall challenge for the reward being an emblem and unlocking more rewards of the Menagerie per week, scaling up to 5 before Shadowkeep's release. And this would have been a huge win for the game. I say would have, but this was only temporary, and seeing how most players who were playing the game at that time got attached to the loot chest glitch, this wasn't satisfying enough for players to want to stick around the Menagerie after Shadowkeep's launch. Maybe for new players to Shadowkeep, this was great, but I still think the best solution that could have been reached was making 4 rewards per run on hard mode and 2 for normal mode. Giving players a reason to engage with the difficult content, and with how much loot there was, I mean, come on. A lighter and more reflective topic to conclude was that the Menagerie was so awesome that it might have been too awesome for the game to ever come up with something to compete again. The first 6-player activity with over 50 items to collect, fully fleshed out boss fights, mechanics and encounters, progression, mystery, really just everything Destiny is good for. It was so good that Crown of Sorrows raid wasn't even the place to be for the season. And mind you, that's a pretty great raid outside of the first encounter. I think the look of the loot from Crown of Sorrows versus the look of the loot from the Menagerie really sums up where Bungie and Vicarious's heads were at for that season. But I guess if you can't top the Menagerie, delete it and forget about it, since it's not even in the game of Destiny 2 anymore. Where the f is the Menagerie? Where the f is the Menagerie? Who moved the Menagerie? With the introduction of the DCV, content like the Menagerie and old raids were completely wiped from the game. The loot sunset and not able to be infused. My beloved turned into my adored. Even though I understand the reasons for the DCV, I think we can all agree that an activity on the same level as the Menagerie would be welcome to Destiny 2. And I also think Bungie agreed and tried to make something to supplement it like the Sundial and Override. But I mean, come on. You see how difficult it would be to even compete with the Menagerie? What do you guys think though? Can Bungie ever make something as good as the Menagerie? Was it just that awesome? I want to end on a positive note though. Just because the Menagerie is gone doesn't mean that something can't take its place one day. If it was done before, I guess it can be done again. And you already know there's been some attempts, so don't be surprised if something big comes one day. But for now, we can look back to those summer Fridays of hopping on with some good old-fashioned Destiny and relaxing with your good friends while shooting some aliens and reflecting on why the Menagerie was so awesome. Thank you for watching, subscribing, Patreoning, merching, and listening to me talk about video games. I'll see you after this set of bloopers and fancy music in the next video.
What happened?
Holy shit.
I got you. Panicking not reloadable.
Bob, go ahead and take this out.
Are we good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Give me a second, I'll let you know when. 3, 2.
How much damage does impact casing? I think it's like 5.
Key gone.
Key gone.
It's 3 symbols, so it's 3 houses.
Wait, just wiped. Are you kidding me?
That's painful.
Are you joking, bro?
Did you do?
Basically, what I was saying was, this is the best game of all time. I don't give a f what nobody say. This is the best game of all time. All that other I don't give a f, and they got my dance in this motherfucker.
Garden Lipstone. I mean, probably Lipstone Garden isn't there.
Like,
It's 3 symbols, so it's 3 houses. 3, 3, 3, 3.